Okay, this talk, it came to me a couple of years ago when I was here at 20Books. When the last year that we were at Sam's Club. How many of you were at that one? Okay, so that was it my first or second one of the 20Books? But it was huge. There were 1,000 people here, and this was like Gold Rush days, Boomtown. Everybody was like so energetic and so full of great ideas, and it was great energy. Everybody's like upbeat, and things are going great. And I was there. I was up on the main stage with Craig Martelle and Mark Dawson and a couple of other big successful indie writers. And they were just all so optimistic. And I've been around a while, and I said, this is all great, but you guys know that your whole indie publishing industry hasn't had its first crash yet. And they were all very happy. So this talk is Black Ice. What did I do? Black ice when your career spins out of control. And again, indie publishing is just racing along. You guys all know we know what trad publishers don't understand yet. And we know how much opportunity this is. And when you're an indie writer, you have all the freedom to do what you want. There are endless possibilities ahead. And it's like you're in this convertible racing through the desert, and you're open air, and it's freedom, and this is great and wonderful. And you just be careful it's not Thelma and Louise driving. Okay? And I will warn you that this is a realistic and probably very depressing talk, but let's hope that the puppy lives in the end or something, okay? Now, a little bit of background on me, because I don't know if you all know who I am or some of my background, because a lot of even successful authors are still invisible. And it's also an ego boost, and it's a way that I start talking so I can feel good about myself as I go through all this. Thank you, I know, thank you. 5 people do, so I can take that to heart. Anyway, so this is about me. I have, my career has been long and solid in traditional and hybrid and indie. I've had 175 books published. I've got 24 million copies in print in 33 languages. And I've had 58 national or international bestsellers, including a #1 London Sunday Times bestseller. I've won or been nominated for the Hugo Award, the Nebula, the Bram Stoker, the Seamus, the New York Times Notable Book, the Rita, that's the Romance Award, the Colorado Book Award, the Scribe Award, and yes, that is a real Guinness World Record. I set the Guinness World Record for the largest single author book signing in history. I was don't clap yet, we got more. I was inducted into the Colorado Author Hall of Fame. And there was this movie called Dune that I worked on. Full screen credit. I thought I was going to be down by the chauffeurs and stuff like that. And when I watched it, I went, holy crap, I got a full screen credit in the Dune movie. I am a Trivial Pursuit question. It's the middle one there on the left. I've been a question on Jeopardy. Twice. So I've kind of got some chops. I'm what most people would consider a successful writer who's done what most writers want to do. And one year at the Superstars Writing Seminar, which is what one of the it's the writing conference that I run. It's every year in Colorado in February. We're starting our 14th year this year. It's very much like 20Books. We started ours a lot earlier because there were no business seminars at all. Anyway, and you should all come, but I can't promote it at 20Books, so don't listen to what I just said, but do come to Superstars. One of the panels that we did at a Superstars, they had me and Jonathan Mayberry and Jim Butcher and Jody Lynn Nye and Eric Flint and Brandon Sanderson. And the question was, if you could go back in time, what would you tell your younger self? What advice would you give your younger self? And of course, everybody's got, quick answers and interesting stuff to say. But I actually kind of paused. And I really, really thought about that. And I really want to emphasize this because I came up with the answer that I would have told my younger self, like even when my career was taking off. Never, ever, ever assume that you have it made. No matter how good things are going, don't assume you have it made and it's going to keep going. I'm going to let that sink in while I take a sip of soda. One year at the Writers of the Future event, I was talking with my friend Dean Wesley Smith, who I just had lunch with, and he's here giving talks. The other guy there is the late, great, and beloved David Farland. We were standing around all dressed up nice, and we were kind of talking about our careers, and Dean just looked at me, and he said, "So, how many times have you crashed and burned in your career?" Because he was listing off all the times that he's crashed and burned. And I said, "Dean, I have crashed and burned and melted down and resurrected my career again. You can just call me the doctor." Because disasters happen in your career. You can screw things up. And I'm going to tell you ways to, we hope, not to screw things up. And I'll do the first one as obvious things. Don't sabotage your own career. Really, I don't need to tell you about these people. They had great careers and they screwed them up. Crashed and burned by saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, getting drunk at the wrong time, whatever. They sabotaged their own career, and there are a lot more. I didn't hear what you said, sorry. Yeah, marrying the wrong person, yes. Not having clean bed sheets at the right time. Let's move on from that. But those are big famous actors, and they're kind of known to melt down. But writers, you can do the same thing. Don't sabotage your own career. Meet your deadlines if you're working for somebody else. For everybody, every editor, every other writer, whatever you're doing, be professional and easy to work with. The best 4 words you can hold to your heart: don't be a jerk. Because every time, like you're around, 1,800 people here at this conference? If you act like a jerk, everybody's going to remember it and they don't want to work with you. And here's another thing. Don't badmouth other authors. Remember the motto of 20 Books? A rising tide lifts all boats. I can't tell you how many times I've been to writers' conferences and hearing other authors, and all they do is bitch about Stephanie Meyer and her success with Twilight, or bitch about 50 Shades of Grey, or bitch about some other hugely successful book. And I'm like, dude, you would love their sales. Don't badmouth other authors. And this is really important, especially in these days. Don't go off the deep end with politics and social media attacks. You'll become toxic and everybody watches you do it. You might think you're only talking to people who agree with you, but they don't. You might have seen in the 20 Books thing, I regularly post that I'm open for story bundles. I put together these bundles where I get like 12 to 15 other indie authors. We all put our books in a group. Everybody promotes things. Everybody sends stuff around. And then we split the money at the end. They all work. I just finished one that had almost all 20 Books people in it. They promoted for a couple of weeks. Every single book earned about $500. That's fine. It's just some social media posts. But I know a lot of writers who would have been perfect for that bundle. They write the right kind of stuff. The writing is great. They've got a good readership. And they are so politically loudmouthed on social media that they're radioactive. And if I put them in a bundle, 5 of my other authors would leave. Don't do that. But, again, if it's all self-inflicted, I'm not really all that sorry for them. I can advise them, but if they don't listen, well. But even if you do everything right, that's the important part for everybody to listen to and to sink in. Even if you do everything right, There are lots of circumstances beyond your control that can really crash and tank your career. You might think everything's going great. What could possibly go wrong? That's just a Shutterstock image. I love it. So I'm going to use this a couple of times during the talk just to kind of emphasize and repeat some stuff. Disasters happen. And you need to keep your eyes open that some big truck might be coming towards you. You should have a plan B so that you can pivot and do something different if the entire reverse Hera market disappears. And it could. Be flexible. Be adaptable. You need to bounce around and do something different. And one of the things that I didn't know way back in the 90s when I was really taking off is you need to have multiple income streams, because this is a very unstable industry. If you're writing a niche genre that's really taking off in 2022, don't bank your whole career on that. Have multiple income streams, because things change all the time in publishing. So now is where I get to the fun and depressing part, where I tell you about all the disasters that I've had. So I wrote this great high-tech thriller called Ignition with my co-author Doug Beeson. It's like terrorists at Kennedy Space Center. They've got the space shuttle hostage, and there's only one lone astronaut with a broken foot who's trying to stop them, and it's big action-packed, and we sold it for a big six-figure deal to a trad publisher, and immediately we sold it to Universal Studios. They bought it outright. They paid us a huge chunk of money, and with that money, I bought the land and started building the house that I now live in. They were talking about making this into Die Hard 4 with Bruce Willis in the Kennedy Space Center and terrorists at the space shuttle, and action-packed, and everybody was excited. They were having a script being written, and we went through drafts of the script, and they were moving ahead, and then the space shuttle Columbia blew up. And Universal said, we are not touching a space shuttle thing at all. No way. They have shelved it. They own it, and I will never get it back, and they will never do anything with it. I got to keep the first money, but the big money comes when they start filming. And they never started filming, and they never will start filming. So I got heavily into writing comics. I love writing comics. I've done tons of them. I've written for DC and Marvel and Dark Horse and Topps and Boom and all kinds of comic companies. It was steady work. A monthly comic book, if you're assigned as the writer to the monthly comic book, well, you got a paycheck every month. And I could write a comic script for a 22-page comic like in 2 days, 3 days sometimes. But I could knock out a comic script, send it in, and that paid me enough for my car payment and my house payment. That was great. I had all this comic work. I did the Star Wars Tales of the Jedi comics. I did Predator comics. I did X-Files comics. I did, I don't even remember everything that I did. Some Starjammers for Marvel. And I was guest of honor at San Diego Comic-Con twice. And my comics were coming out, and they were regularly hitting number 5 on the national comic book bestseller lists. So they're selling a lot. So the comic there on the left, Tales of the Jedi, that was the first Tales of the Jedi I did for Dark Lords of the Sith. That hit number 5 on the bestseller list. And that one issue sold 490,000 copies. Cool. Boomtown. I had all kinds of stuff. The comic on the right, Star Wars Tales of the Jedi Redemption, was the last comic that I did in the series, 6-7 years later. That one also hit number 5 on the comic bestseller list. That one sold 49,000 copies. The comic market had vanished by 90%, which meant that a lot of titles were folding. There wasn't as much work out there. They really collapsed in on how many writers they did, and I kind of didn't have any comic work to do anymore. Star Wars was a huge breakthrough for me. I think a lot of you know I wrote some Star Wars stuff. I did 54 projects for Lucasfilm. I did the Jedi Academy trilogy, I did Darksaber, I did the Tales of the Bounty Hunters, I did the Young Jedi Knight series with my wife, I did all the comics. I did, and I'm not kidding you, the Jabba's Palace pop-up book. I had it made. I lived close to Lucas Ranch. I was going up there every month. I met with everybody. Everything was great. Like I said, they gave me 54 different projects. Anytime they had a Star Wars project, I was on speed dial. That was right there. And everything was great. Well, here's a TV show that you might have heard of. This comment has nothing to do with that TV show. Some of you may have heard about Alan Dean Foster's war about Disney must pay, about all the royalties he never got. Well, there was a kind of a war before Disney must pay, many years before that, where Lucasfilm and the trad publisher decided that, well, they were paying the authors to write the books, and it was just too much to give them royalties, so they were going to cut out all of our royalties. Now, my Jedi Academy books sold over 1 million copies apiece. They only paid me 2% royalties. I know you indie publishers can't imagine paying somebody 2% royalties, but that's what Star Wars writers got. But that was too much. And a bunch of us authors and the Science Fiction Writers of America did writers really need to get paid royalties. And Lucasfilm said, there are other writers out there. And overnight, I never worked for Star Wars again. So all of that work went away. Like I said before, disasters happen. Keep your eyes open for something coming. Have a plan B so that you can move on to something else if a disaster hits. Be flexible and adaptable and have multiple income streams. It's also a good idea if you have a partner who's independently wealthy so that you can write all you want, but that doesn't always happen. Fortunately, even when the Star Wars stuff crashed, I had started working in X-Files and Dune and Batman and Superman and all kinds of stuff, so I had lots of things that I could do. The entire media tie-in market was great. I mean, it was all this stuff. I worked for Outer Limits and StarCraft, and I did the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and I wrote a thing for the TV show Heroes and Star Trek comics, and all of this stuff was great. Media tie-in was the huge part of my income. There was a novelization gig for almost every major movie. Every movie that showed up in the theaters, somebody wrote the book that showed up in the grocery store. There were TV show spin-offs. There was Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica and Buffy. There were Space 1999 books. There were Disney Princesses books. There were My Little Pony books. I didn't write those. Computer games all had novel tie-in books. StarCraft, which I wrote some of those. Lara Croft, Assassin's Creed, the X-Wing game. They all had books that people got paid to write. And it was such a booming industry that I could pick up the phone and go, I've got a month free, give me a Star Trek book. And they'd pay you $12,000 to $15,000 to write one in 3 weeks, and then I'd do something else. And I'm a big fanboy. I loved Star Trek. I loved Star Wars. I had it made. The work was always there. I was going to keep writing, and until it wasn't. The media tie-in field just vanished like Blockbuster Video. This weekend, Wakanda Forever came out. It'll probably be one of the biggest movies of the year. There is no paperback book for Wakanda Forever. There was no book for the Avengers movies. There was a book for Dune, but that was kind of preordained. But there used to be, any movie that came out, somebody got paid to write a paperback book out of it. And they just don't do that anymore. And there are all kinds of reasons. A lot of it is that the movie shows up on Netflix in a few months and nobody needs to. You used to buy the paperback book because when a movie went out of the theaters, you wanted to relive the experience, and that didn't happen. So the media tie-in field collapsed. Around 2010, I think a lot of you know this, but around 2010 was just like Hurricane Katrina in trad publishing. Borders went bankrupt, which was 50% of the bookstores in the country. And for those of us who write genre fiction, Borders carried more genre fiction than Barnes & Noble did. There was actually a bias that Borders was kind of the trashy popular fiction stuff, and Barnes & Noble was more the artsy stuff. I mean, just a slight difference. But Crown Books, well, I'm not even going to, Tower Books went out, Crown Books went out. It was a disaster. Major publishing houses consolidated. There used to be like 15 publishing houses that could bid on your work. Now they're down to 5, and thankfully it's not 4 because the lawsuit didn't go through. But that's all. Yeah, that got stopped. So Simon & Schuster did not get sold to Penguin Random Penguins, whatever it is. But so when 14 publishers that are fighting over your work go down to 5 publishers that kind of have their own little territories marked out, author advances just drastically dropped across the board. Nothing to do with like authors' careers sucking. This was like publishing just said, we don't need to pay $500,000 when we can pay $50,000. Here's a tale of 2 epic fantasy trilogies that I wrote, 10 years apart. In 2009, I did this big, the one on the left, the Terra Incognita trilogy, sailing ships and sea monsters and the Crusades, big, fat, epic fantasy things, each one 200,000 words or more. And because this is 20 books and we are all honest and we share our numbers, I will tell you that I got paid $400,000 to write that trilogy. 10 years later, for Tor, I sold another epic fantasy trilogy called Wake the Dragon. Spine of the Dragon, Venge War, and Gods and Dragons. They're also 200,000 words long, big, huge, epic fantasies, the same kind of stuff that I did. After bidding and sending her out to a bunch of publishers, we sold it to Tor, but the biggest advance we could get was 1/5 of what I got for the Terra Incognita books. And I'm a bigger name now. It just publishing didn't do that, didn't do what they're supposed to do. And it is no easier to write a 200,000 word book for 1/5 the money as it is to write it for 400, well, the 3 for 400,000. But there were no other options. Well, I did indie stuff, but that's different. Now here, I don't know if any of you have ever considered, but selling to Hollywood, that's kind of the perennial epic quest. Don't ever believe what they say, and don't ever count on the money. It's great if it happens, but don't ever believe them. If they're going to option something, they're going to tell you, well, we can't pay anything, but we want rights to it for 3 years, and we're going to sell it big because I know Steven Spielberg's hairdresser. I can't tell you how many times people have come to me with the, I want your book for free and let me shop it around, and I can't afford to pay you anything I can't afford to pay you $1,000 for the option, but we're going to make a $300 million movie. Well, how are you going to get $300 million if you don't have $1,000? And the other thing about Hollywood people is they love to talk. Well, let's talk about this option. We'll be on the phone for 4 hours, and all they do is talk. And you don't get paid for those 4 hours. But that's okay. They want to talk again the next week. And then the next week, and then the next week. I had one that I actually optioned to a known production company, and they wanted this strategy phone call, which was 2 hours. And all I did was kind of like, well, what can we do? And it was okay. And then they wanted another one the week after, and another one the week after, and they were never really saying anything, and they didn't pay me anything, and they just kept going around and around in circles. And I found out that one of the producers that was talking for 2 hours every week was just a geeky Kevin Anderson fanboy and wanted to talk with me every week. Well, no thanks. We cut that off afterward. Here's some examples. Dune, as I mentioned, kind of a successful movie, kind of a cool movie. $400 million box office, 6 Academy Awards. We are now, and I'm also consultant, I'm working on part 2. They're filming it right now. All that's terrific. But what you have to keep in mind is Brian Herbert and I started pushing this, working on this, talking with producers and studios and optioning it and selling things and working on it. It was, I'm not kidding you, 27 years until the movie came out. And this is Dune, the best-selling science fiction novel of all time. Not just some random story that you wrote. I've got this big graphic novel that I wrote with Stephen Sears, who's the producer of Xena, Warrior Princess. We published this graphic novel, Stalag X. It's about human POWs in an alien concentration camp, and it's really cool concept. And we we have now fully optioned it to New Republic Pictures, to Francis Lawrence, who's the guy that did the Hunger Games movies, I Am Legend. He did Red Sparrow. So like a real guy, real director, real credits, big name stuff. They're having a script written right now by one of the Doctor Who writers, and we've been on conference calls with it and everything. This thing is in active development. But Steve and I have been pitching this literally for 21 years. Hooray, but if it takes that long for the popcorn kernel to pop, you're going to starve before the popcorn comes out. Then there's a TV series spin-off of Dune called The Sisterhood, which I'm co-producer on, and we've been working on it. And all this is great. I don't mean to be dissing any of this stuff. That 5 years ago, they bought the rights to our novel, Sisterhood of Dune, which was a really nice paycheck. They bought the rights to it. And they've had writers' rooms, and they've got people doing the scripts and doing treatments and developing it. And they build it all up, but then they got rid of the writer's room, and they tossed that concept out and brought in new people and got a new thing coming in. And again, this is just what happens in Hollywood. It turns around and does these things. And now they are finally, they've got, I think, 8 of the roles cast. They've got the first couple of scripts done. They're talking about how soon they're going to start filming it, which, again, don't ever believe them until it actually happens. But this is good stuff. This is not me complaining. This is all good stuff. But I told you they bought the rights 5 years ago. We have been working on this, and every time they send a treatment, or every time they send a script, or every time we have to work on this. We read it, we critique it, we spend hours working on it. We don't get paid another penny until they start filming. So that's 4 or 5 years of working our butts off, and it will pay off. They are going to film it. But every year in January, my wife and I sit down and kind of do our budgeting, and because I'm still hybrid, I've got a bunch of trad contracts, and I've got some other Kickstarters, and I've got my indie publishing, everything. So we kind of lay out, all right, we've got this much money coming from Tor and this much money coming from Bantam and all this stuff, and we lay it out. And at the bottom of the list we go, and here are all the things that could pay off in Hollywood. And year after year after year, none of that money comes in. So you cannot budget for any of this stuff. And I know a good friend of mine he believed them. They optioned one of his stories, and they were going to make it, and he was going to live off of that money once the film was made. And they never made it, and he believed them, and he quit his job and kept waiting, and then he maxed out his credit cards and kept waiting, and then he second mortgaged his house and kept waiting, and the film never got made, and he was destroyed. Don't believe them. If it happens, great. If you do sell something and they give you the $1 million payoff, then come here and buy everybody a beer. That's a good use of your money, but do not plan to pay your house payment with it until the check. In Hollywood, they tell you, don't count on the money until the check arrives. Well, that's in publishing. In Hollywood, it's don't count on the money until the check arrives and you cash it and it clears the bank. Then you can count on the money. So I'll go back to this, the usual. Keep your eyes open. Have a plan B. Be flexible and adaptable. and have multiple income streams. And one of the single most important pieces of advice that I tell any writer is, don't quit your day job. Sorry. Seriously, if you've got a day job that you can tolerate, that pays you retirement, vacation, benefits, health care. Good Lord, as writers and you pay your own health care, my wife and I, just the two of us, were paying $25,000 a year just for health care. Most people don't even make $25,000 a year. So I got a job as a university professor teaching a publishing master's degree, and I love it, and it pays me health care, and it pays me a salary too. So anyway, and in fact, if you would like to talk to me about it, I'll tell you about that. Anyway, try to plan for unexpected disasters. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. Sometimes it has nothing to do with your writing. How many of you have families? Okay. Sometimes you can't say no. If you have family, look, I have a big family. My wife has a big family. There's always one or two of those people that you just know they're the screw-ups. Something's going to happen, and you're going to be stuck trying to fix it. It's your kid has to go into rehab, and it's $80,000. Or your niece, her car broke down and needs $1,000 to get it fixed. And if she doesn't get it fixed, she can't go to work and she will lose her job. And if she loses her job, she's going to ask to stay in your spare room until she gets sorted out. And so you look at all this stuff and all of the options, and nobody else can help her out, and they always come to you. And you know you have to spend that $1,000 to get the car fixed so she keeps her job so she doesn't move into your spare room. You've all got family members. You all know somebody gets sued. Somebody gets divorced. So all kinds of stuff. This is family things, and it's nothing that you did wrong. You were writing your books. You were happy as a clam. Everything was working out fine. And then, oh crap, Joe got arrested, and you got to bail him out or something. You all know what I'm talking about. As you get more successful, you might want to have employees because it makes you feel big and important, and you need an assistant, and you need to have a managing this or that, or you have somebody who's working with your stuff, and you have all kinds of different employee things. Well, the help isn't always a help. Sometimes they screw up, that they might fulfill your Kickstarter, and all of the backers who backed you for a hardcover copy of your new book, and your employee sends every one of them all 7 hardcover volumes of your series, which was at a much higher level of the backing. And they're gone and they're out, and you can't get them back, and that just costs you a huge chunk of money. You might have an employee that leaves and is a disgruntled employee, and they sue you for something. You could have an employee that embezzles stuff from you. You could have an employee that really, I don't want to say anything about I have wonderful employees right now. Don't take this wrong, but I have had experience. That they got us committed into contracts that cost us huge amounts of money to get out of. Employees can do things to you that you have to pay for. You can have medical problems, and this comes from left field. Your spouse could have medical problems. You could have medical problems. Christine Catherine Rush, who is also here speaking, been one of my best friends for most of my life. She's a very successful writer. She was at a time working on all kinds of Star Trek books and romance novels, and she had contracts with trad publishers. She was doing indie stuff, and she's my age. She was keeping herself healthy. She would exercise every day. She liked to bike ride, and she was going bike riding, and she had an accident on her bike, and she fell off, and she broke her elbow. She broke her elbow, which meant she could not type or write because the pain was so great. But when she took the pain meds, She couldn't think straight. So neither way could she get any writing done, and she had 5 books under contract that were due. Fortunately, her husband, Dean Wesley Smith, is also a writer and a prolific writer, and he was able to ghostwrite and finish her books that were under deadline. But there were months where Chris was in terrible pain. She couldn't bend her elbow, she couldn't write, and she couldn't fulfill any of the stuff that she thought was just coming her way, that she had it made. The writer, I forgot his first, KW, initials, something W, Kinsella. He wrote a book called Shoeless Joe, which was made into the movie called Field of Dreams. Huge success, great book, great author, great success. He got, because of Field of Dreams, he signed a contract for a big amount of money for his next book. He got in a car accident. He bumped his head. He got a concussion. Nothing really diagnosed wrong with him. He had migraines all the time, and he couldn't think straight. It was like the creative part in his brain had turned off. He had all this success right there, right in front of him, and a big new book contract, and he didn't publish another book for 14 years. He wanted to, but he said it's just not there anymore. And that was just a car accident that can change in a minute. You can't predict things. This is an honest-to-goodness actual tweet that I posted on New Year's Eve 2019. Because 2019 sucked. I didn't expect a global pandemic. And we all had problems with the pandemic, but I just want to, this is something that nobody counted on. And here's how it affected me, because again, I was in that convertible racing across the desert. Like I said, I run Superstars Writing Seminar. This is a big deal for us. It's 200 and some people. They all pay to come in. We had paid hotel reservations. We had booked rooms. We had set up, we had got all our materials done. We had bought plane tickets for our speakers. We had everything. And then the pandemic hit, and we had to cancel Superstars. That cost us a huge amount of money. They came back the next year, but still, we lost deposits and all kinds of things. Some of you may know that I did tons of science fiction conventions. I would go to science fiction conventions and comic cons, and we had this really big pop-up bookstore. This was called the Bard's Tower. We still have it. I've sold it to somebody else, but it's still there. We had big banners, and we would go to comic cons, and we would sell books, and I had other authors there, and we'd be kind of like what we do here on Friday. But it's this big deal. In fact, one con that we went to, I think Salt Lake Comic Con, I walked home in that one weekend with $18,000 in cash because of our book sales. And boy, did TSA have trouble with that. Well, all of a sudden, there were no conventions. I had $60,000 worth of book inventory in my basement for 2 years. Remember the bit about the Plan B? I finally got my frickin' web store open so that we sold everything online, and I sold quite a lot of them. Also at that time, the 2019 time frame, I had hired a speaking agent. He started booking me to give talks because not only am I a science fiction writer, you can twist that a little bit because I am a futurist. And I would go and give talks to banking conferences and talk about the future of money. And I'd get paid like $5,000 to talk for 45 minutes. And I was just building up and booking all of that stuff, and then the pandemic hit. So all of that shut down. I told you this was depressing. Now, I do want to get to this, though, that remember, indie publishing, you guys have had like 10 years of a gold rush, that it's been a boom decade, and you guys all know there are so many unexplored markets, there are niches that you can do, and 20 Books is killing it. You know all the possibilities that are out there. You're entrepreneurs, that you can see things and you can do things, but all the stuff that I've been talking about in like my traditional publishing career and some of the indie stuff, We have had so many crashes and resets and turnovers, and Indy has had some smaller ones, but I wouldn't just assume that there's no cliff ahead when you're roaring across. Don't think that a big disruption can't come to Indy as well. As I said at the beginning, never ever assume you have it made. Sometimes I feel like I'm the king of Swamp Castle. I hope most of you know that reference. But if you don't, and because I didn't embed the video, I'm going to just read. This is my dramatic presentation of the king of Swamp Castle. And I'm not going to try the British accent very much. Other kings said I was daft to build a castle in a swamp, but I built it all the same just to show 'em. It sank into the swamp. So I built a second one. That sank into the swamp. I built a third one. That burned down, fell over, then sank into the swamp. But the fourth one stayed up. And that's what your career needs to be. Come out of the black ice, try something, then try something else, and keep trying. Always have a plan B. I didn't emphasize this enough. If you have money now, set aside a financial nest egg for a rainy day. You can buy us all beers if you want, but put it aside, put it in a saving account, and be adaptable. And just last so that you know, David Tennant's my favorite doctor. So.